All right, welcome to the Fanalyst YouTube channel. Make sure you hit that like and subscribe button. We'll have more interviews coming for you. This is actually our 11th interview, so if you've missed the other 10, you should go check those out. The kind of cross-section of Fanalysts, male, female, basketball, football, different backgrounds, all over the place. So make sure you check that out. Also, check out Fanalyst US on Instagram and on Twitter, where we'll be posting some of these interviews, but also sneak peeks of the app that is coming and the website that is already in development. All right, today we are joined by someone who recently joined the 5 Reasons Sports Network, but he's been working for 3,621 outlets before he came to us. I'm going to allow him to pronounce his name because there's no possible way I will get the correct accent and inflection. Go.
Bryan Fonseca. That works. You could say it a number of different ways. Timmy likes to emphasize Fonseca when we do the Bahama Rican boys on the network, but yeah, Fonseca, whatever.
That was easier than I anticipated. Well, you can follow him at Bryan Fonseca and the NY. You'll probably have more of an issue with the Y and the Bryan than you do actually with the last name. But what we're going to get to today, we're going to get to, a few things. One is your journey, obviously, at this point. But also, one thing we want to focus on here with Fanalysts is the idea that it's a hustle, right, to a large degree. I mean, you have to make yourself available to a whole bunch of different outlets. You have to make yourself good at a lot of different things. And then even when you do that, you have to find a way to promote yourself. We're going to help take care of that with the app. Okay. So that's what's coming, but you got to get to that point before we can do that. So Bryan, let's go from here. Take us through your journey a little bit, where you're based and all that good stuff.
Oh man, how much time do we have? Because I don't know if we simply have enough time.
7 minutes and 32 seconds. Go ahead.
We don't have enough time. But what I will say is this: I got my start in 2014 while I was still a student at St. Francis College. What happened was toward the end of my sophomore semester, Mark McSherry, who became my first mentor, I guess, and he was the moderator of our student newspaper, St. Francis Brooklyn, which I was not yet a part of. And he basically was recruiting to me to be part of it because I had a blog where I was writing about sports, and a lot of my classroom assignments were like sports focused. So then in the fall, I started covering volleyball, Division I basketball, Division I men's and women's basketball, cross country, track, soccer, et cetera, and became the sports editor as a senior. And then that's when I started doing stuff on camera also for the athletic department, where, we would produce, live stream games and various different forms of content, et cetera. My podcast co-host, the Ain't Hard to Tell podcast co-host, Dexter Henry, sort of helped me get my feet wet there. And that's how we met, because he was a new media coordinator at the college. I was a student who graduated, got a production assistant job at the US Open for 2 weeks. And then after that, had a part-time role with the athletic department for a couple of years as an assistant sports information director, all while balancing freelancing at the Queen's Ledger over here in New York City, covering high school sports, college sports, boxing, Nets Daily at SB Nation, covering the Brooklyn Nets. So doing NBA games, practices, et cetera. And I think I'm forgetting something already, but there's been so many different projects. And then along the way, just a lot of things came on. So it's a lot of like days where, on Monday, you would go to a Nets practice and then go to your office at St. Francis, which is a couple stops away on the train. Good thing about New York City is that you could do a lot of different things in close proximity. And then the next day, it's like, oh, okay, fight week is starting, time to cover a fight. And it's going to be, you got to go to the media stuff. The press conference is usually on Thursday, the workouts Wednesday, the weigh-ins on Friday. I never really did the weigh-ins. And then the fight will be on Saturday. So you're balancing all those different things at the same time, and then later on start doing like TV with MSG Networks, and then the pandemic hits, and most of the things I've been doing have been at home, and then that's not including like my own independent projects also. So it's been a lot.
Well, I think you're going to give me the title of the episode, which is going to be et cetera, which is kind of is kind of what the life of a Fanalyst is, but you've encapsulated it there with that one word repeated. And I think your path is instructive. How old are you, Bryan?
I just turned 28 in January.
Okay, your path is instructive because I think in the past, people with your background who were doing a lot of things at a college would typically go intern. Honestly, I mean, when you go back to my,
I tried. That's the thing. Like my first job in the industry was after my junior year, this is actually an interesting story. After my junior year, or during my junior year, I was being recruited by, I just made my LinkedIn profile. I didn't even
Mhm.
have like it fully done. And I was being recruited for like a ticker coordinator role at the CBS Sports Network. And I didn't get the job in February. And I was pissed off because all of my peers were getting internships. And the competitive side of me was like, I'm fucking better than a lot of these people. And it doesn't make a lot of sense. And I work harder and all this shit, and it wasn't adding up. So the CBS Sports comes along. I get the job in July. But
Mhm.
then what happened was it was part-time, it was decent pay, more than I had ever seen because I don't come from money at all. And what happened was they were saying like, "Oh, don't worry about it when school comes," because they knew I was going to be a sports editor. I was getting promoted. They knew like that was going to happen. Like, "Oh, don't worry about it when school comes. We'll work with
Mhm.
your schedule. We'll make sure that we work around it, et cetera, et cetera." Even though I'm going to be in class full time, the sports editor, the newspaper, freelancing, et cetera, et cetera. And then when school came, they basically let me go because my schedule was more hectic than whatever. And I was very resentful of that for a long time, even still to this day. Like, I don't let certain things go. Like, I have a list of people in the industry that I can't stand. I have a lot of these different things to just keep myself motivated whenever I'm feeling lazy, which is not often, but sometimes you need that little push. It makes me psychotic maybe in some way, but it is what it is.
We call it an ARIA list. I have one of those lists myself.
Oh, there we go. There we go.
If you were a Game of Thrones fan at all, I've checked off a lot of them. But Brian, let's get to the next part of this, because we talk about et cetera, et cetera. We talk about versatility, right? I mean, that's the key thing here. So I mean, you are in, as you mentioned, the basketball space. You're in the boxing space. You are in additionally, you've kind of gotten yourself into the culture, music space. Also, Bahama Rican Boys covers a lot of that. Can you speak to that, sort of the importance of versatility? Because I do feel, again, there are a lot of those who get into the industry here and they want to do one thing, right? Like, I mean, the model is you want to cover. I mean, a lot of people, they want to cover the NFL, right? They want to cover the NBA. I mean, and that's pretty much it. And I was a Dolphins beat writer for the Palm Beach Post at age 24, covering the Miami Dolphins.
Hmm.
But again, that path doesn't really exist anymore. So in this day and age, like, how do you sort of quantify the importance of versatility in that sense, and also platform sense, which different types of media?
So Dexter, who I mentioned earlier, we talk about this all the time because we have an 11-year age gap. So
Mhm.
he comes from where like it was sort of traditional, where you would come up covering high school sports, then you work your way to college, then you get to the pros, then you become a columnist if you're in the writing space or whatever the case may be. And then that like quickly changed by the time I was trying to break in the mid 2010s.
Mm.
And it's like, all right, you have to be able to do all these different things. Like growing up, and I kind of always wanted to do that to some degree. I just didn't think it would be this way. Like growing up, I remember I even wrote this in my yearbook, graduating high school. I wanted to be on TV on SNY, just covering the Mets or whatever, and then also be a columnist at the Daily News, like just have
Mhm.
one of those things. Then eventually get to ESPN. And then by the time you break in like 2014, 15, 16, 17, you recognize like, yeah. And then especially me, right? Like I'm somebody who currently right now I'm wearing a shirt of Allen Iverson stepping over Donald Trump. So it's like I know I'm not gonna fit in ESPN in like a seamless sort of way. So you're trying to figure out, all right, where's your voice going to be? And I'm somebody who like you have to be able to pivot. And my thing is like I like wearing all these different hats because maybe it's just that I get bored doing one thing very easily.
Mhm.
Now, that's not to say that I don't want a full-time job somewhere, because freelancing it can get exhausting and it's not for everybody. And people are like, how do you keep track of your schedule? Whatever, whatever. I would say this, like it's hard to sustain after a while, but ideally you would want to find a place or a couple different places where you can do different things within that umbrella so that you don't
Mhm.
have to worry about like all these different other elements. Like I have been wanting to cover sports for a while, but there's like other things I've been wanting to do. And one of them was creative writing, for example. And when the pandemic hit, all of a sudden it's like, and actually before the pandemic hit, I wasn't really doing like too much. It was a lot of independent stuff. And then I was going to start working with a prominent media company in some sort of social slash writer role. and then Rudy Gobert tests positive, the NBA
Mhm.
gets shut down, and then that job essentially got shut down. So
Mhm.
then I was like, all right, I'm in COVID, in the pandemic, watching Cuomo, in New York City, give these press conferences, 1,000 deaths a day, and then I am just looking through all my old video games, and I get this idea to write a fiction novel after playing one of them for a few minutes. So the importance of like pivoting and just being able to do different things and willing to do different things, like that's just always going to go a long way for anybody. But you have to find a balance, right? You can't stretch yourself too wide because then you're going to regress in certain other areas. It's something I'm still trying to like really navigate and really master, which I don't think I have yet, but I think I'm doing a good job. Just I'm not perfect at it.
Well, yeah, one of the expressions that I've borrowed from Eric Spolstra is adapt or die, which is kind of how this business works in a
Yeah.
lot of different ways. And I think it will a lot more. I got two more things here for Bryan Fonseca. And one thing I do want to acknowledge is that Bryan is going to be helping us with social media on Fanalyst as well. So he's going to be looking for creators like yourself, perhaps, that we can
Mhm.
promote, maybe do these interviews, but also introduce you to the app. But to that point, most of, I wouldn't say most, but about half of the creators at Five Reasons Sports that I, manage to a degree, are based in South Florida. You came to us a little bit differently. Obviously, you have an interest in the Heat, although I don't know that you're allowed to admit it up there. But also, you're part of Bahama Rican Boys with Timothy Bain, who's based in the Bahamas, who obviously has an interest in the Heat. But beyond that, you're in a major market up there, and as you mentioned, like the media jobs still exist in New York. I mean, in some places in the country they don't, but in New York, Boston, yes, there's been contraction for sure, no question, but not to the degree as some of the smaller sports markets. They still cover the NHL there. They still cover MLB there, which they barely do down here in South Florida.
Yeah.
Obviously, to a large extent, they cover MLB up there. But to that point, like how vast is the Fanalyst universe, the way that we kind of classify it in the New York metropolitan, in the biggest market in the country? I mean, how many of these people do you come across that are not working for major outlets, but they know how to do a whole bunch of different things and they're kind of scrambling and hustling to get their work seen?
You'd be surprised. Like I remember just going into different media rooms, and I'm somebody who, I've been in a lot of different media rooms, right? It's boxing, MMA, college basketball, NBA
Mhm.
basketball could be all different media rooms, and the occasional big high school game, right? And occasionally like football, whatever. But you see, and sometimes I'll see the same people in two or three of them. And it's like, oh, okay, like there's actually somebody else sort of going into these rooms. Normally they would be of color. They'd be black, Latino, Asian, something along those lines. That's something that I've really noticed a lot, where
Mhm.
it's like the way the structure is industry wide, it's not unlike anything else. And usually, and you know this as a fair thinking white guy, uh, a lot of people in this industry who they could afford to sort of just do that one thing and stick to it are usually white
Mhm.
guys, not women as much either.
Mhm.
So there would be people I would come across and sort of identify with where at a boxing event. They'll be like, "Hey, I have my own outlet, whatever." It'll be a name I've never heard of. Then I look at the site and it's like, "Oh, they actually do pretty decent work, and they're just doing it on their own and full time." They're like a trainer at a gym, and this is what they do on the side. There's a lot of that in New York City. A lot of that. A lot of people just figuring out different ways of doing it. One of my friends who actually just passed away a couple weeks ago, Xavier Porter, is an example of
Mhm.
this, where he created a boxing website, brooklynfights.com. I would see him at every single fight thing that I would pretty much go to, which is going to
Mhm.
be weird when I start going back and he's not there. But he's an example of one of these people where he just does that, right? And he's doing it on his own, but he has a full-time job doing something else. So you notice in New York City in particular, a very diverse city, a lot of
Mhm.
the creatives that you come across independently, it's like that's the way that they have to do it because they weren't able to go to college at a certain time. They weren't able to go to a big university or whatever. They just didn't establish those connections, and usually those people happen to be of color, and a lot of them are doing really good work also. So you see
Mhm.
that in New York, especially, I would say.
I'm glad you brought that up because I noticed something at a recent Laker Heat game
Mm,
down here in Miami. Los Angeles, a very similar market in a lot of ways, diverse, to New York. And it struck me, and this is no disrespect to anybody who was in the room, because a couple of them I know well, and I respect the work of the others. But literally, we were waiting for LeBron to come in after the game. It was during the Bills Chiefs game, okay, in the playoffs, and so we were waiting a long time in the interview room for LeBron. And it was me and the 7 traveling writers for the Lakers were white men
Mm.
between the ages, I would say, of 30 and about 45, maybe 42. All 7 of them. Now, that's something that I would have anticipated in like Salt Lake, maybe, or Indianapolis, but LA. And
Yeah.
and that struck me because it tells me something. I mean, you're talking about the biggest basketball team in the world, right? In terms of interest, of overall interest. And they got 7 white guys that are traveling with the team covering LeBron James. And I know even in Miami, we had a more mixed crew than that. But in Cleveland, it was Chris Haynes, who when I was up in Cleveland, and I was sort of one of the 5 or 6 beat writers the first year LeBron went back to Cleveland. But it was also Dave McMenamin, who was part of this crew as well.
Yeah.
Jason Lloyd, Joe Varden. And it strikes me that the mainstream outlets are not doing a particularly good job
That's the thing.
of finding, as you said, creators of color in this space. It just doesn't seem like it's happening.
And you know what happens in New York also is that a lot of the mainstream outlets, because yeah, they slant heavily white, and a lot of them will also bring in people from other markets to come
Mhm.
work in New York City, so that people like me, it's like, all right, we've been here, we obviously know this market. I used to get on WFAN about this all the time, and I still do to some degree, because they just brought on somebody of color finally. But like you look at their lineup and it looks like a golf club in Indiana where it's just white guy and white guy, white guy and white guy, white guy, white woman, white guy and white guy, and maybe a black dude, but the black guy has to be a former athlete. That's
Right.
the other problem, right? It's like you have to be a former athlete usually to get these roles. And now you look at the gambling space. I do stuff with FanDuel, and I think
Mhm.
they have done a good job of getting diverse people to like, be on camera and things of that nature. But generally, what you see across the gambling space, particularly at some bigger companies, right, is generally white people. I am Puerto Rican. I'm probably the only Puerto Rican who's talking about gambling at a major like gambling place. And I'm not even doing a lot of gambling centric content, actually, right?
Mhm.
But affiliated with them, that sort of puts you in that space, obviously. But I think just this is what it is across the board, so that people of color then have to figure out different sort of ways to get in and be independent and do these other things, because it's very hard to get those connections. And then on top of that, it comes down to like your personality. How do people want to deal with you, whatever the case
Mhm.
may be? You're more inclined, if you're a Jason Whitlock, to be one of those people at a bigger company, because you think like a lot of those people making those decisions, if you get what I'm
Mhm.
saying,
Or at
right? Like
least you
that's just
or at
how it
least
was.
or at least you pretend to, right?
Or
Like
pretend
that's
to, right?
right. Which I think with him, 90% of it has to be an act, I would say. But that's where we. That's right. He put me in a clown suit on Twitter during the Heat Celtics playoff series. He's not my favorite. But let
Nobody's favorite. Well, not nobody's, but not mine, certainly.
yeah, not mine either. But let's close with this, Bryan, because I think again, as we're looking for creators, one of the things we're trying to do at Fanalyst is make it easier for them to organize the closet, as I say. And you have a lot in your closet. You've got all of these different things. I guess in 30 seconds less here as we close. Like, how do you do it? I mean, would you it's just Twitter bio essentially? Is that all? Is that the only place you can really put it?
Twitter, LinkedIn.
Mhm.
LinkedIn has actually been a really good resource in terms of getting stuff done. Like in this entire industry, I only had, in I guess 7-8 years now, one full-time job, which I did get through applying on LinkedIn. Now
Okay.
I hated the fucking job after a while, so much so that I ended up leaving in September and then started freelancing again, which is where I'm here now, right?
Mhm.
And part of that was just like different opportunities came across, and then I identified other places where I like what they was doing, like 5 Reasons Sports, and was like, yo, like I can do something there. And me and Timmy are friends, and it worked
Mhm.
out, right? So it's like the organization is just like you're writing a lot of things down, right? Like I
Mhm.
used to I used to be able to lay out things that I'm going to do for the week. This is what I'm doing Monday, this is what I'm doing Tuesday. Now I just have to do it day by day, because things always come up or whatever. And it's not really a complaint, right? This is what it is. And honestly, being able to do for now everything from home has been helpful, because if I was having to go into an office a few times or a couple times a week, which is another reason why I left that job, was because they were going to put people back into the offices, to which I was like, we've been doing just fine for almost a year without being in the office. What the fuck are we going back for? Right. And we're not doing anything important in the office anyway. But anyway, it's like, you have to be able to just organize yourself if you really want it, right? Like, I think that's important too. If you have that desire to whatever it is, whatever your goal is or whatever. And I'm somebody who, like, I'm very always motivated, goal oriented. I'd like to think I'm focused on a lot of things. I definitely, want to pursue greater things in a myriad of different ways. And look, we all have a little bit of an ego that we need to satisfy, right? Whether we want to acknowledge it or not. And I've looked at other people that I've came up with who I know they're not as good at me, not as good as me, or don't have the resume at all that I have, that I'll put up against pretty much anybody in my age class or experience class. And I'm like, look, there are certain things that I want to get that I think I'm deserving of more than X, Y, and Z. So yeah, there could be some selfishness to it as well. But look, being honest is half the battle as well. You know what I mean? So I'm not a dick. That's an important thing, to establish. But yeah, so I would say you have to just find your balance and really, really hone in on what your focus is, and also be honest with yourself on what your goals are and why you want to get there.
And that is one of the things that we hope to do on Fanalyst is create incentivization, because obviously people want to see their work recognized. And we're going to have different tiers. We're going to allow people to unlock different features on the app as they go, as they create more content, and as more people find their content. There's nothing wrong with more followers and more likes if you're doing good work. That's the way. Although, that's the way I look at it.
Although I'm gonna add one more thing, because this is important in terms of the versatility discussion. People will notice this. I don't want people to lose their focus, but if you notice on Twitter, it is and you know this, is very easy to build your following on Twitter if you're covering one thing, maybe two. If you're somebody like me there's going to be a couple basketball things. It's going to be a Bahama Rican Boys, the Ain't Hard to Tell podcast episode, some FanDuel stuff. And I'm going to tweet about fights every Saturday night, because that's what I do. Like, it's a little bit harder to follow. And then people get scared of doing all these different things and building their following. So what people should know is that follow count, don't worry about it. Just do great work. And if you want to do a bunch of different things, go ahead and do it. Don't worry about other people getting a bigger following than you for just doing that one thing, because when they do eventually try to spread their wings, they're probably going to fail at doing so, because people just want to follow them for that one thing.
Well, you're speaking our language here, because we're going to be able to filter things on the app so that if you provide a whole bunch of different content, people are going to be able to find exactly the content from you that they want. So they may not want all of it, but they may want you on the NBA, or they may want you ultimately, as we add some fight elements, we may want you on that. May want you on college basketball, and that way they don't have to get the other stuff that they don't want. They'll be able to get just that. All right. We could go on and et cetera here for about 40 more minutes, but we appreciate the time with Bryan. You can follow him at Bryan Fonseca, and why you may want to reach out to him too through the Fanalyst page as well, because we're looking for Fanalysts like you again to do these interviews and to introduce you to the concept that we're putting together on the app. Have a good day. Thanks to our producer here, Manny Chang. We'll be back with more interviews.